Okay, with Evan Leong, The Bridge is the feature film. It's a documentary. Let's right off the bat, you can tell the synopsis better than I can. What's this film about?
Well, thank you for very much for having me. I'm honored to actually have someone interview me about this project, and it's been a labor of love, a project almost took 2 years making. We started this right before East West's 50th anniversary. So the initial reason in thinking of this project was let's start this project for the 50th anniversary. And so we started, 2020, 21. No, wait, 23. I see. About 2 years ago. And this film basically is about the history of East West Bank over the 50-year span, covering, and mirroring the Asian American community's history in the last 50 years. And it's great because the story of the bank kind of matches the same sort of evolution of the Asian American community.
So they commissioned you, the East West Bank Foundation commissioned you to make this film. Do you remember
Correct.
where you were, what you were doing when they kind of like approached you about this project?
Yeah, I mean, as a filmmaker, I've done a lot of stories in the Asian American community. I mean, if you look at my career, most of my films have always been stories about the Asian American community. So this one truly was like one that I was like, oh, this fits exactly what I do. And I'm at a place in my career where I think I can tell a story about a bank, right? I think that was always the initial sort of approach to this was like, okay, well, how do we tell a story about a financial institution, right? And how we humanize that?
Gotcha. So then obviously a lot has happened in 50 years. There's a lot to tackle in terms of like the evolution of the Asian American community, obviously discrimination, kind of like the generational kind of changes between like your generation now and the first generation. Probably like there's a lot to tackle. So how did you kind of like focus with like did you start writing a script about outlining, okay, what thematically am I going to tackle here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this bank and this and East West Foundation, they really kind of focus around this one man, Dominic Ng, and the CEO chairman of the bank. And I just got to spend a lot of time with him, really a lot one-on-one time to understand what his vision was and what it's become, and because he's been the CEO and the chairman for the last 30 years now, right? And so, um, or 25 years. Ooh. And basically the bank is one in one with who he is as a person and his personality. And I think for me, finding his story and finding what was important to him and finding, what drove him to push this his own sort of goals and the bank's goals and the community's goals, to understand him is really figuring out how to tell the story, right? And so, the last 50 years, you're really trying to, you do, and then, initially the big thing was that we didn't want to make this you know, a, a discrimination sad story, right? Because this
Yeah.
is a story of a success. And, obviously we have to have, the elements of drama in a film. And so you're trying to find the things that make sense. Like, how did they overcome these moments? Yeah, I think as Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, we know what we're up against going into, whatever field we're going into, right? Even as a filmmaker, I know the odds are just stacked against me just of the way I look and the way my own network. And I think, you know, trying to figure out and navigate that in America is something that, I think it's a great example of how the Asian American community succeeded, right? And I think that was truly one of the things we tried to explore.
And then like cinematically, you kind of like you're obviously you have a lot of interviews, but I like how you kind of had the television kind of set up where you kind of
Hmm.
showing different acts. Like who kind of came up with that idea where you kind of like were showing
Yeah.
the kind
No,
of like
well,
the yeah, go ahead.
no, I mean, I think the last 50 years is a lot has changed. And I think
Yeah.
initially I was like, okay, and I did do that in some of the televisions things, but we eventually started using more of these sort of stock visuals. But I was thinking about the changing of Chinese American living rooms, right? And our TVs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the best way to see 50-year span through visuals is to actually see the changing of living rooms and TVs, right? I mean, we talked that when Dominic is in the 70s, he has this little TV in his dorm room, and then we get to, later 2010s, and we had this Chinese Americans and the flat screen TVs, right? And I felt like using the TV as a way to use our archival footage, it also kind of sets us in place and a time. Yet at the same time, we're able to share the archival footage.
And okay, so you interviewed tons of people. So I want to talk about you kind of set the tone with I think his name's Eugene, the historian, the
Eugene Moore,
Chinese
yeah,
American
yeah,
historian
yeah.
in Southern California and California and Los Angeles in particular. And you kind of had him go through the process, and then you interviewed authors who wrote about it as well. How did you kind of approach them, and where did you kind of like how did that come about? Just curious.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? For me, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and I mean, that's been in my life since, as far as I can remember, right? But not a lot of people know that. And a lot of mainstream America doesn't know that, right? And then
Yeah.
I almost feel like every documentary these days has that element of the Chinese Exclusion Act. But to really, I feel like we have to hit that home and we have to continually retell that story, but we got to try it in a different way, right? And I think that's always my approach as a filmmaker, right? It's like, okay, yeah, there was an Exclusion Act, but how does that relate to this story? What are the new story elements in there that makes sense for this story, right? What things from that era? And, so you gotta, to understand the community, you gotta go back to the roots. And, Eugene Moy and the Chinese Historical Society in LA is truly one that was the place to start. And I think, if we can understand where the Chinese American community was and where it was going in the 50s and the 70s, then we set up the stage for where East West is going to be, right? Because, East West is a bank, and I think, the bank was and the community were intertwined so much that we tell the stories of the people.
Mhm.
That's a great way to tell the story of the community in the last 50 years.
And then you got these, let's call them racist images of the past or the distant future or different distant past, like of these over the top kind of like, racist images about how someone who's Asian is, I guess, right? And I guess
Yeah.
that where did you
Have
like
you ever seen those images before?
I
Personally,
have,
for you?
unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm old enough, like we were for the podcast, like I'm in almost 50, and I'm old enough to remember stuff like that on television. And like, you know
Mm.
what I mean? Like it's not that far, that's not that far away,
It
right?
isn't,
So yeah,
right? It really
yeah,
isn't. It really isn't. Everything feels so fast now. Yeah, we're not
yeah,
that far away from. I mean, the civil rights is not that long ago, right?
no.
It's just, and feel like we're so far forward, but it's just this. I think it's the internet and the social media era where we're just getting fed so much stuff, and you know, um, I mean, I'm sorry. What was your question about?
No,
Oh,
no, no.
those images.
Where did you find? I'm just sort of like, where did you grab those? Did you go grab those images
Oh
from
yeah, I
the
mean they're
internet?
all over, right? I think we pull a lot of them from historical resources, and we
Yeah.
found different ways. But I think the biggest thing for me was like showing that even back then the Chinese Americans still wanted to find a home, even though there was this, okay, this is what we're up against. And I think for me that mirrors exactly, even when you get so far in success, you're still knocked down to just your race, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens with Dominic, right? Even this is not something that's solved, it's not something that's fixed, and yet we're in a better position, as a community to face those things than we were before.
This is kind of a segue question I want to ask you because it's maybe because I'm finding that our generation, because I live in a community where it's Jewish people and Chinese people.
Mhm.
And there's like no Christians, right? So basically it's an interesting community. And I'm telling you, it's like 99% is either you're Jewish or you're Chinese. And I feel that what happens is that everybody's going into their own corners and
Yeah.
there's not enough kind of like, and we're like the lucky ones too. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, from like a job, economics, whatever you want to call it. And it seems like we're not kind of like, even with the Chinese community, I don't know how it is in Los Angeles, like where everybody, you got the Chinatown, which is great. You got it's almost like you have the Chinese bank, you have the Chinese accountant, you have the Chinese lawyer. And it's like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I understand that there's the community, but there's almost like a danger of like, we all go into our little tribes and we don't kind of like talk amongst our, I don't know if that makes sense to you, what I'm just saying. It's
No, it totally makes
like
sense.
my
I mean,
community.
look, all our communities are very insulated, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
first come to the country and you don't you want to go around the food, you go around the people that speak your language, your same culture. the same customs, right? And you want to be around them. Those ultimately, those are your people that are probably your family and your family members and their cousins and their friends. And that's, you get insulated in these communities. You know, there's a lot of Asian American communities here, you know, Korean ones, Chinese ones, Vietnamese, where you can come and they can stay in this, you know, 10 block radius and never have to learn English,
Yeah.
right? And
It
the
happens in
idea
it
is,
happens in
yeah.
Canada all the time. Yeah. Go ahead.
And so I think as, you know, I'm sixth generation American, right? And so these are all the first generations, right? And what happens is the idea, I think in Asian Americans especially, is that we find a way to integrate ourselves and participate in the rest of society fairly well. We're able to, you know, use school and different sort of meritocracy sort of ways to, you know, get in the professional world and succeed, right? And I think what happens then, we find our ways to get it. And the idea, though, you know, I think I'm glad you brought this point up because, you know, this whole film is about the idea of bridging communities, right?
Yeah. Well,
Bridging,
it's called the bridge, right?
and you know, and Dominic, you know, I knew that like this is like we can easily just stay in Chinatown, but
Yeah.
that's not good for us. Like, how do we share who we are with other people if we can't build alliances? We can't do it. And you know, it's one thing to, you know, do a community organization, another thing, community thing. But when there's, you know, billions of dollars and they're doing business together,
Yeah.
that's a whole other kind of relationship. And
Yeah.
that's also a lot more power and a lot more influence. And I feel like, you know, we all kind of think of banks and, you know, the financial crisis, just banks as like these sort of, you know, institutions that are not personal, but this place, I mean, I don't know anybody here that's not happy. No one, I mean, everyone feels like they're on the same sort of mission. And, you know, people love working with this bank and the things that they've been doing. And then for me, like that, this feels actually more, you know, as much as a business, successful business it is, it also feels like this community entity that's, you know, that's important for them to tell these stories and showcase and continue to find ways to bridge with other communities, right? I think that we didn't explore it fully as much as I'd like to, but you
Yeah.
know, East West is a big art program, but you know, now they have this they've in the last, you know, couple of years, they've been focusing more on other, not rather than Chinese or Asian art, a
Mhm.
lot more you know, Black, Latino, everything else of you know, forms of art in America. And I think that's been quite exciting. And you know, constantly looking at ways like how do we get to the mainstream? How do we, you know, and for change my own thinking, right? Because I make films for myself, my own community, but I'm like, okay, well, how can I make films? What can I go for the things that feel a little bit more mainstream that, you know, I that have the same interest in that, the same thing that you have interest in. How can we share that? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of what we do as filmmakers.
Well, I see that what happened was that when there's divisiveness, like say you have a president who basically calls something the Chinese virus, which is a racist statement,
Right.
and
Right.
so then that community, it happened with October 7th with Jewish people, where like it's like they don't trust somebody else because there's so much blowback and there's so much kind of anti-Semitism, so they just go into their little corners because they know they feel safe there. And then when you're seeing like kind of racist people and then say I'm white and basically I could be racist, you know what I mean? So it's like they'd rather just stay with their own. And I'm just as generally, I'm saying being general, of course, right? And that's what happens when there's like divisiveness happens where it's like there's a lack of trust, and it's human nature, right? We want to protect
Mhm.
ourselves. So we want to protect ourselves from who we are, what our ideology is. And I'm just finding that that's what happens when like I don't know if that makes sense to you. I'm finding it like
No,
from
it totally does, right? I mean,
yeah,
look, I specifically go in the Asian American community because I think that's a safe place and also a place where I can work and I know
yeah,
the stories very well. But at the same time, I mean, we're all living in this experiment, right? America is truly an experiment. There's no other country like this in the world where it's like all these people together, all these different cultures together, and you know, I think it takes effort. I don't think it's just gonna work. We truly need to build and continue to find ways to, you know, work together and celebrate each other
yeah,
and, you know, find a way to um share our stories that we all have empathy for each other. I think that's what it ultimately is. And then, you know, as we get, you know, into darker times and things are getting harder, it's easier to fall into your own sort of community and insulate support because there's
yeah,
support there. But,
yeah,
you know, it's important to step outside of it and build alliances in other communities and other places because I mean that's the only way people will know who we are and that's the only way people will change the way they think about you, right? Versus, you know, media is the only way they're really gonna like, oh, that's the I always have this argument with, like, there's only actors for like up to maybe like the 2010s for Asian American actors. The one job they could always get is like the Chinese delivery guy, right? And
Yeah.
it was sad, but the reality is like, okay, well, all the writers in all the places in Hollywood, they don't have maybe any Asian friends. So their perspective is like, okay, the one Chinese person I meet is from the restaurant. That's what I'm going to write about, right? And I think until you change that sort of that perspective, then they're only gonna get one thing.
But it's about power, right? It's about politicians. It's about guys like yourself who basically make big budget movies, and you can hire and you have control and you have cast. And then, you know what I'm trying to say? It's just basically then you can tell your stories on a more mainstream level. That's what it's like. Or being a politician and basically especially in Los Angeles, you know what I mean? Like if you're so basically, so then you're part of the system. You're part of
No, I mean, yeah,
the
it's a
job, like
powerful medium.
businesses, whatever, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. I always tend to think of how powerful our film and media, up till, I mean, this point, I feel like we've been so powerful in creating a message, right? I mean, I think the easiest way is like, I mean, it's hard because we live it and we've experienced our whole lives. But if you look at even just how we feel about Korean people right now and their soft power through the media, through their K-dramas, through their K-pop, through their entertainment,
Yeah.
they've really created a brand of who they are as a people,
Yeah.
right? And community. Before that, no one really knew what Koreans were. I mean, it's like, oh, there's North Korea and I don't know what's in South Korea. But this moment right now, and it's truly just through entertainment, right? Through
But
drama
look
and
at the movie, like look at the movies they're making, right?
absolutely. And it's changing the way we think about them,
Yeah,
right? I mean, and that's, I mean, that's the power of entertainment, right? If you can tell a great story and have, you know, viewers come out of that with a new perspective and empathy for your community. I mean, if you really think about it, I mean, that's the power of the Jewish community in Hollywood, right? I mean,
yeah.
that totally set the stage of how we view, Jewish people because of all the movies, of all the presence they had in their stories, in the 80s and the 90s, even now.
100%. Yeah. Well, yeah, there was an agenda, and it's like, but it's happening now, right? Like think like four of the last two of the last four films won Best Picture were from Asian American filmmakers, right? So
Right, right,
that's
right.
amazing.
And it's a beautiful thing.
That's, you know what I mean? Like that's pretty incredible, right? Like best actress, Michelle, she's in your film, right? So she won best actress, you know what I mean? It's like, and then you have Michelle Kwan in the movie, who basically, that's what it's about. It's about like showcasing, and funny point that you were making, because it's like the Korean kind of arts scene, where like I was talking to a Japanese filmmaker a couple of weeks ago on a podcast, and he was saying that the Japanese, they see the Korean kind of success, and that makes them want to be successful too, right? That makes them want to, that gears them up for the competition.
Inspiration, yeah, inspires them, sure. A little
I'm sure
competition,
some of it's
sure.
dysfunctional,
Pushes them a little bit,
but some of
sure.
it's dysfunctional, like competition, but it's still competition, right? So like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah, no, I mean that's a beautiful thing, right? It's like you're just pushing people and artists, and I think it's always exciting when you're seeing new stories, right? New stories and new perspectives and new ways to tell the story. At the end of the day, you know, and in these Korean films, they all feel like something that are just the evolution of what Hollywood was doing, right? And I think that's exciting.
yeah, well, they're changing. Like Parasite changed the genre, right? They said, okay, it's been happening. They've done it before, but nobody's done it that great. We're like, okay, we're
Right.
gonna switch genres halfway through the film, and we're
Yeah.
gonna keep the tone the same, and we're gonna make sure that you guys still like it. Like
Yeah.
and then now everybody's trying to copy that, right? So
Yeah, no, I think it's really exciting. I mean, I've been in this for so long that, I always wanted to see more Asian faces, more Asian filmmakers, behind and in front of the camera. But, in the last 5 years, it's just been an explosion. And as a filmmaker, it's just like, this is exciting because I've been hoping for this whole time.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, there's a lot to compound. Like this movie kind of like you kind of it's kind of cliche, but you kind of have to watch it a couple times because there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, right? I mean, I don't think I do a documentary. I've done a documentary with this many. I think we have almost 40 people in the film,
Yeah,
and this guy, all the people we cut out too, right? So I think then that's a hard thing as a filmmaker, right? How do you tell a story with multiple voices that you're never going to come back again in the film?
yeah.
And from a structural standpoint, I'm like, oh, okay, well, this kind of works on some weird level, but you just have to find the stories, I think, in each one that take a different angle than what we already know.
It's thematically driven in a sense, right? Like it's about progress and like you said, bridge. It's in the title. It's about bridging these connections and because from an economic, you talk about the economics about how much the bank has progressed, the employees, how much it's worth, the value. Obviously, you talk about celebrities, right? So like just like in how like we're dare I say less racist than we were at the 70s, I guess, right? But there's still people who don't like it, right? That's a whole other movie, right? The people who don't like this success, that if you're not white, that they don't like that, right? White people, like I'm just being honest, right? You see it in politics, right? So
Yeah, and look, I mean, that's just America, right? That's what we're up against, right? And I think, if anything, I give you a perspective. A little bit just a perspective of what it's like to be, of an Asian American, trying to, navigate America, right? It's difficult, yet at the same time, we know what we're up against, and the opportunities outweigh the costs, and I think that's okay. We're okay with that, and I think to celebrate the success is truly what I think East West is about, right? When we talk about, Michelle Kwan, Michelle Yeoh, I mean, these are people that, when we look back in history, and I think for me, all my documentaries kind of evergreen. I love to be able to pop it in 50 years and still be relevant. But, these are people that truly influenced, and crossed over to mainstream America, early on. And, they were models, role models of our communities. And, okay, how do we find a way that how can we really showcase them? And East West is like, oh, let's put them on the pedestal. And I think that's exciting, right? Because, no one really is going to do that, right? Without that.
I want to talk about your editing in a second, but I gotta ask you about it's Dominic. He's the guy, the gentleman you
It's Chairman
interviewed.
CEO, yeah.
You interviewed him on like a swimming pool on top of a swimming pool or something like that. Like I'm like
Yeah.
I was worried he's gonna
Yeah.
fall in. Like how is like how is that set up? I'm sure I'm not that smart, but I'm sure it's a metaphor for something that how you staged them.
Yeah, it was a nice little set. It was actually it was in this one of the first Chinese restaurants in Chinatown, so I felt like the space had some good bones. I wanted to create this idea. I love water. I feel like almost all my films have some element of water,
Mhm.
and there's many ways talking about the water, and the water works well with this film with the idea of the bridge and you know first generations coming over the water to come here. And I think for Dominic, for me, and putting him on that sort of that's a one sort of set and prop that we built. I wanted to create something that felt like a modern sort of uh uh I guess not necessarily royalty, but in terms of like where we sort of place people in our society in terms of like what these, how does that translate from our own sort of Asian American culture to, what would it look like in America, right? And for me, the water and the backdrop, I mean, it feels very much like he's the one helping us connect, right? The idea that thing is supposed to feel like this bridge over water, and he is the one, lending his hand to help us across, right? And I think, visually it looked really cool at the end of the day.
Yeah, it did look cool.
And
Yeah, yeah.
I think, even my mom was even talking to me about how she liked the elements of, the dark water, yet there's lights and there's this big contrast between dark and light. And, these things are all just, visual elements that kind of help push the theme a little bit more.
And then food restaurants, it's a big part of the film as well. I love that scene where you bring in the kind of the pastry chef and show his creations, and then obviously talk about Panda Express, which is a huge franchise. But food, obviously, big part of most cultures, but especially the Chinese culture. That was a
I
big part.
mean, the reason why people go to Chinatown is they go to eat, right?
Yeah,
And And for me, I know that it's also one of the things I always love seeing in films, right? When I see a film that's delicious looking food, it makes me hungry, and I like the film a little bit more. And I think, food is very important to our culture. And yeah, at the same time, I'm like, as a visual tool
Yeah.
for the viewers, it gives them opportunity to just, kind of like, I mean, we're giving them a lot of information about a lot of different things. So lets us tap into that part of the brain, the hungry part, and so it
It's
gets them
about, yeah,
dumping that
well,
in
it's
the
about
film.
everybody, every culture generally like has that connection with food, right? So, and then, but now it's part of the main, it's like Italian food. It's like it's a part of the mainstream culture, right? So even though it's a little, I was talking to my friend's, sorry, my son's friend's dad is Chinese, and he was saying that it's not the same. It's not Chinese food, quote unquote, like the restaurant.
It's Chinese American food, right? You ain't finding a lot of this food in China, that's for sure. There's no fortune cookies in China, right? And
Yeah.
these are all American sort of, and that's why I feel like, as a 6 year Chinese American, like I feel very Chinese American. I go to China, I'm like, okay, I'm very different than them. And then when I'm here, I'm feeling very different than everybody. But it's definitely a hybrid sort of situation of who I am. But it's interesting. Chinese American food, Chinese restaurants are almost as American as apple pie, right? I mean, there's a Chinese restaurant in every city in America, even the tiny ones, right?
Yeah.
The tiniest town in Idaho will have a Chinese restaurant, right? And so everyone has that, and everyone is eating that, and that's a part of actually very much American sort of culture. Uh,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's the connection with the Jews and the Chinese. Jews love Chinese restaurants, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but he was saying that he's like first he came here when he was like for university and he stayed. He was saying that it's the sauces. It's like we don't have as much sauces in our food than they do in Chinese, like more salts, more
Yeah.
fat. Yeah. So,
Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of the food is all comes the Chinese food as we know it in America up till maybe the last 10, 15 years was always kind of origins are from Guangdong, southern China. So it was all just one kind, right? And
oh,
so,
gotcha.
right, I mean, all the Cantonese came over earlier, and so they're the ones that established all these restaurants. So in the last 10 years, and a lot more mainlanders, a lot more northern Chinese, northeastern, western, central China, Xi'an stuff has come over. So though you're getting other kinds of foods, but imagine if like the only food we got from America was from the South, and they all moved to their new America, and like, oh, that's American food, right? And it's just fried chicken and mashed potatoes, right? So it's very specific of the food that we have here. It's very specific to like a region of what it's become, right?
Gotcha.
Versus
That makes a lot
all
of
of
sense.
China is like all different kinds of foods, right?
Yeah. There's a
Just
lot
like
of, yeah, there's a
California.
lot of, it's a big, let's just say it's a big country. There's over 1 billion people. There's a lot of like
I
communities
mean,
and cultures. Yeah.
pizza's different in Chicago than it is here, right? And I think that's just, the
The
food that we
Italians will
get.
say this is not pizza, right? When they come here,
Yep,
right? So,
yep, yep.
so, okay, let's talk about the film. Let's talk about the editing because it's 85 minutes long. I'm
Mm.
sure the first cut was 4 hours. I'm assuming there's so many interviews. Like you said, you probably had to cut some out. There's so many stories, so many threads. Like you talk about food, talk about economics, the banks, talk about the culture, the community, the real estate, all these elements. So you got these interviews all down. I'm sure you kind of have a written, kind of loose idea how you're gonna put it together. But I'm assuming this took a long time putting this film together in the editing room.
Yeah, it always takes a long time. I mean, any kind of movie like this, any kind of documentary, I don't think it ever just works, right? So you almost always have to just give yourself a lot of time in the edit, right? And now, unfortunately, I have this one editor I've been working with, my editor, Greg Louis, I've been working with for the last 20 years. So like we have a easy sort of short form, and he's amazing. So I think for me as a filmmaker and you're working with the edit, you're just constantly trying to figure out, okay, don't indulge in some things, and try to keep this viewer keep them excited, keep them going, because we're gonna touch, every 5 minutes we're in a different city, in a different place with a different story. And I think, how do you connect all those, and how do you feel like we're moving forward, right? And I use sort of like, the financial crisis, these sort of like historical bank elements as the drama points. And, used all the other stuff, the success stuff, as placed those in the timeline of where those would be of, these sort of financial moments, right? Because as a bank, right, they that's the one thing that they are um, exposed to is just the way the financial markets work, right?
Yeah.
And they're exposed to just the way our whole financial industry economy works. And that's their ups and downs, because most of the time everything is fine. But when you have a 2008, when you have a Silicon Valley, these are moments that, okay, things affect them, that they actually, and as a viewer, right? I mean, we are not really interested in boring day-to-day stuff. We always want to see the drama, right? And I think that's what, how you use that story as our sort of our A storyline, and then using all these other stories of the B's and C's to help push those themes.
And did you have to send it to the East West Bank Foundation and get them to approve it? Like it was legit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to make those. I grew up in the era of like Final Cut, da da da, and filmmakers were like headstrong and all that. I think in this era, you know, I don't think I am that, the all powerful director God, where it's like, okay, I what I say is right. I'm a very much a collaborator, right? I mean, I love showing my work. I love getting outside opinions, and I love making sure that, people I'm working with, that live it are like, they're proud of it, right? And this what this film was. This film was not a gotcha moment or a financial, sort of, demolition. It was a story of like, let's celebrate the last 50 years. And I want to make sure a film like this is, the people that are in it and are a part of this and are going to live with this longer than me are proud of it, right? And I think, and so that collaboration, with them it was fine. I don't, I stand where I need to stand, for certain things, because I know as a filmmaker, structurally things work. And then, at the same time, like, I also am very collaborative, and I think I shared it with them, but I don't think there was anything that we really opposed. There's small things here and there, but nothing like, oh, it could have been so much better if we did this. No, nothing like that at all. It was always more of like, oh, well, we should make sure we include this person, or we should add this in. And I think when I delivered the first cut, we were pretty close. So that process was pretty streamlined.
And then, okay, so was it did they want a certain timeline? Like I know it's a kind of a generic question.
Yeah, no, no, not necessarily, right? I mean, they wanted to get it for the 50th anniversary, but then what happened was, I got pushed because of, things happened with Silicon Valley and adding the Dominic racism moment. The longer I took, more things were happening to them,
Yeah.
right? And so I actually got to we kept going, and we actually we pushed it all the way to the release of this year, when last year was their 50th anniversary. Um, you know, so.
So yeah, because you're doing you're getting like all the stock footage, right? Like you're
Mhm.
getting like you even got the Academy Awards, and you have like newspaper shots, and you have obviously your B-roll like looking above Los Angeles. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of shots in this film. It's like there's a lot going on. Like it's just that you can, and then you kind of see your almost your best for last. Like in a sense, you're like celebrities, quote unquote. You kind of I just thought it was a really well edited film. I just like because I see a lot of documentaries that are good, but they're not like crisp, if that makes sense. It's just a really well.
Completely agree. I mean, look, I've been in this for 20 years, so hopefully I'm still good. I'm pretty good at what I do right now. And I think that's important, right? Because it's hard to tell, these making movies is not like writing an article, right? And I think a lot of times documentaries end up being the sort of journalistic sort of approach, and like, oh, I got to include it because all these things, but movies are really more about emotion, and documentaries are more about emotion. And I think for me, making sure that, okay, you get enough information, but also you're feeling something. And if you
Yeah.
feel something, then I can go anywhere with you as a viewer, right? But if you don't feel anything and I'm just giving you information, um, that always that can lose the viewer. And I think, especially with subject matter like this, is like, okay, well, how do we navigate all this at the same time, making sure that we don't lose the viewers.
But it's also about kind of you're giving us universal kind of antidotes, and you're giving us universal kind of pulp culture elements in the film, where like even in the 70s, you're showing us like the Jeffersons all in the family. You're showing us the Academy Awards. You're showing us evolution, but we all kind of we all know it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, right? What culture, your race, whatever you are, you're connected to those elements, right? There's certain elements in your film. And it's like, it just makes people feel comfortable. If that, I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that was a conscious choice on your end or not, but it's like, yeah, we know that. We know yeah.
Well, I mean, those universal elements are the things that people can grab onto, right? Like it's a weird thing the way the mind works when you're watching these things,
Yeah.
right? Like when you get grounded in a space, in a place, in a time as a viewer, um, you can buy into the world as you can buy into the world of the characters, right? I think a lot of times, sometimes you just because you have a camera on them doesn't mean I connect to them, right? I just because they're walking around, I don't feel like, but it's the smallest subtle things that we don't always get, right? I mean, I think the easiest one to say is like Eugene Moy, right? Like when we first start out, he's like, so in Chinatown, this was the first you could see downtown, and then the bike guy goes by, and all of a sudden he's like, hey man, you gotta let the bike guy go, right? Like immediately you're like, oh, I like this guy. So now
Yeah.
if he goes about in Chinese American history, I'm like, I'm there with him, right? And I think it's a little bit of a trick, but I think, well, again, like if I just let him tell you information, you're not going to care about what he has to say, especially unless you're like into that subject matter. So I'm always trying to find the ends and get your viewer grounded in a space so that I can give them some information that they never heard before. If they ever heard it, let's give it to them in a different way.
Mhm.
And that's just, you're always looking for the subtleties, right? Of beyond just when journalists go, like when news goes in for a story, they already know the story they're going to get when they're going to interview someone, right?
Well, a lot of documentary filmmakers do the same thing.
Exactly. And I think that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
I think the era we're in is that, okay, you have a budget, you have 5 days, you got to get it done. I come from this old school, it's like from Hoop Dreams. They're like, okay, we're going to hang around till something happens. And you just put in the work. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of time, but you understand the character far better than you would if you got them for 3 days. You get their trust, so they're going to give you so much more. And you really get to tell the story in a way that you know they may not have been revealed to you with just the things that you read about them, right? And I think that's always my thing, is like being able to spend the time with the characters and spend time and try to get them to give me something beyond what they thought they were just going to give me.
So referencing back, you referenced Hoop Dreams, like maybe 35-year-old film. They spent 4 years with two characters through grade 9 to into high school, which is like, yeah, that's a pretty big That's a pretty big investment of your
You can't
time.
do that anymore. I mean, can I go to Netflix and be like, hey, I'm shooting these guys for 5 years. Can you give me a budget for 5 years? Like, it doesn't really work like that
Well, you
anymore,
could do
right?
Boyhood style, where you could just like do it for every 2 weeks a year, I guess, right?
Yeah, and then even then, it's like, who's going to fund that? 'Cause if it can't, I'm sure they found some to fund it themselves, right? It's just
Yeah.
not the way that process works. I think you tell better stories this way, the more lasting stories. But I think the way we consume information and stories these days, it's just so fast that it's like we're in a weird place. Like if I want it that fast, I'm just gonna get on TikTok or social media, right? But if I want to like live in a space, I get this feature, but it can't be sort of in the same format of what we're doing these days, right? Because we have there's an influx of documentary filmmakers in the last 5 years, right? That weren't documentary filmmakers before, right? And I think all of a sudden you're like, oh, they can do things a certain way, but nothing beats like time versus
About an hour into the film, you did bring up Trump's kind of like, what is it, terror? What do you do? Tariffs against the China, like whatever. He's an idiot. Sorry.
China. Yeah,
Basically, but it was interesting to hear into perspective, like Dominic and other people in the film were like, they thought this was like, we're going here now. Like you almost feel like you want to be relaxed. You want to feel safe, that you're like, you know what I mean? That this is over. This era is over. And then just to hear the most powerful person in your country or in the world or your country say stuff like that, it's like, oh my God, we're going backwards. It must be like such a terrible feeling. And you kind of it's probably you kind of like touch on in the film. Did you want to
yeah,
touch on it
I
or?
think what?
did you want to touch on it, or did you?
Yeah, I think look, I mean, I think every Asian American documentary, if you're going to tell some contemporary story, you got to talk about Asian hate and where that stems from, and all these terrible things that are happening to our community. And Donald Trump was definitely a part of that sort of vocalizing all those things. And I think for me, um, the story has been told 1,000 times, and social media is telling it every second and getting people angry, right? And that's
Yeah.
the thing, right? And I'm like, okay, well, how do you tell this story in a different way, right? And how does it make sense to touch the bank, right? And I feel like, you know, we've heard so many stories from actors and celebrities about Asian hate, and even young people, community activists, but we actually haven't really even heard from the senior citizens, the ones that were getting attacked.
Yeah.
And I felt like, oh, this is a great opportunity to do that because of the East West bet. When I heard they told me the story that they changed, the prices of the director of cashier's checks. I mean, it's very subtle and very small, but that changed the life of everyone there. And then, it set a new standard of what this needs to be. And, it's subtle, but it gave this opportunity to really kind of look at this from a different angle, right? Rather than just being like, politicians do something about this, police do something about this. It's really like, okay, let's create some empathy with these people. And then I just felt like it was such a different, interesting angle to
Well,
explore
yeah,
this.
it's because it's funny you brought that up, because we did a short film like last year, and it's like this organization in San Francisco, and I was interviewing the person. This is I'm being very general, of course, but she was saying that, listen, the older Asian generation, especially Chinese, they would always back away from any sort of conflict. If any, they would never, if they got shit on or they could be told bad things, whatever like that, they just walk away. We're not doing this. She's like, we're not doing it. She's very passionate. We're like, our generation, we're fighting. We're gonna fight against you. We're not taking any of your shit anymore. It's like, I understand why my grandparents did what they did, but we're here to fight. And it's like that's the difference when happening our generation. So for you to get the older generations to talk about it, that's important, I think. I don't know, like, if you agree with that statement about the 20 generation.
Hey, that's what it is, right? I mean, as generations go on, they're just more American. They understand the resources, they understand what's fair, what's right. I think a lot of the first generations, you're coming to America because it's a better opportunity. It's not because you're rich and you want to come here, right? It's because you left everything to come here. And so, the best way to succeed is to keep your head down, right? In this country, like, you can succeed very well if you just keep your head down and work hard. It's one of the few places I think you can change your class. And I think, um, you know, the older community and the older generation don't always they just we know them as in from our community because they're all our grandparents, but I think they've never really had a voice
Mhm.
outside of you know that what
Yeah.
they tell us. And I think the next generation though, look, I tell all my friends that are first generation, I'm like, this is what your kid's gonna look like when they're gonna be my
The
age, because
trailblazer.
I mean, it's America, right? And you want to find a way to express yourself and be different, right? And
Yeah.
they always have this saying, right? That you don't be the nail that sticks out, right? You get hammered down. So
Have you ever received blowback, like going into a meeting, like a professional meeting, and then you show up and they're like, you're wearing a mohawk? I'm just curious, like,
no, I definitely got. I mean, I think they're all excited to see it. I don't know if that cost me a job or not, but I've definitely had friends be like, I don't think you should be doing that anymore. It's very unprofessional. But fortunately, my wife is like, this is the only haircut she likes. So
there you
I'm
go.
kidding.
And
I'm
it's
cheating.
you, right? Like, it's like, as long as you make great films, that's all. Like that's all. As long as you're professional, you're not a flake, right?
Right, right. No, right.
All right. Well, I got you on for a long time. One last question before I leave. I could talk to you for a long time because I think this is a really important film, and not only that, but I think it's a really well made film. So I know it's
Thank you.
playing on
Thank you.
different channels right now. It's playing
Very much
on.
appreciate it.
We'll put a link on the website, but it's playing on Apple TV, Google Play, Prime Video. It's like it's you did on the festival circuit. You got won all kinds of awards, including our festival. Our particular festival, we send the audience to you. What did you think about what our audience had to say? It was we kind of did it on purpose, like a non-Asian kind of point of view. When it was wondering what they thought they had to say.
I mean, look, again, like I said, before. I was a little wary of like getting feedback from my film. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't really love all, I mean, sometimes I like feedback when we're in a rough cut, but when we're done, I don't want to hear it from anybody really, unless it's positive. And, you know, at the same time, I know as a festival programmer, you know, you guys watch a lot of films, and to see the feedback and the passion, even just like I don't think you guys could have faked all that because it was truly like just to see that you guys are really connected and got the film, you know, as a filmmaker to get that from your peers, people also in the industry that and also see a lot of films, you know, not just your average viewer. For me, it means more than your average viewer coming in being like, "Oh, it's a great film," right? But we get other filmmakers, other producers, other people in your industry telling you like, "Oh, this was good," and it really for me was like, "Oh, that means a lot." And you know, I think you know it's always the scariest thing to show your work, right? And it's always the scariest thing to just to be exposed and be vulnerable when we make this because it's such an arbitrary, you know, objective perspective of good film is good or bad, and object subjective, right? And I think for me, you know, when you do get it right, you're like, oh, I'm doing the right thing, and I am, you know, what they hired me for, right? Because you're just you doubt yourself still to this day. I still doubt myself what I can do. But it's, you know, I think that's important as a filmmaker. You need to once you lose that, you're gonna feel you're gonna let up on the gas. And for me, I use that as fuel to just work harder.
All right, man. Well, I hope, I'm assuming you're working on something right now because you're always a busy guy, but what did you say? You said, oh, you're doing golf, the one about the
Yeah,
road.
Roseanne, I'm doing a documentary, a
Yeah.
feature length on Roseanne. We're in post with that right now. Hopefully we get maybe we'll play the Chicago Film Feedback next year. We have, and then I'm also doing a doc series on a car racing series with Daniel Wu and the IMSA racing. And yeah, it's been
You're
fun.
showing like the Asian, these like they just happen to be Asian, these two
Yeah,
individuals.
they have the age. And if you think about it, right, these guys have completely crossed over. I mean, Roseanne's been on Golf Digest. You know, Daniel Wu is
Yeah.
he was the head, the lead of Badlands, right? These are all characters that I feel like from our community grew up in the same way I did, but yet have really crossed over in mainstream America, which kind of means that like you're in a part of the conversation of influence. And I think that's always exciting for me to to feature and make role models because I didn't have them.
So there's sports related films like documentary sports documentary seems to be, hey, they've risen up a few like notches in the last few years. We basically in Canada, because I'm from Canada, is that there's a lot of Asians now playing hockey for the first
Oh
time,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're going to
I
see
heard
a
about
lot
that.
of Asians in the next 10, 15 years in the
That'll
NHL.
be cool.
I guarantee
That'll
you.
be cool.
They're all
Yeah,
because a
that'll
lot of
be
these
cool.
players are playing AAA and these like Ontario's crazy for hockey, right? So they have
Right.
these kind of like elite kids. So you're going to see that. You're going to see a lot of Asians playing hockey in the NHL in the
That's
next 10.
exciting. That's
Mark
exciting.
that
Yeah,
down.
I actually been hearing about that a little
Yeah.
bit. That's kind of a cool. That'll be cool. That'll be
And
exciting.
the greatest baseball player in the world is happens to be Asian as well, right? So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, right? I think you know, even those Asian, so even like Jeremy Lin and even these Asian hockey players, right? It's like they gotta be good. They can't just be average.
you think
When
so?
they look at them and the potential, they
Yeah.
have to be exceptional
Oh,
early
gotcha.
on
Yeah, yeah.
in AAA. Jeremy Lin had to play lights out
No,
to
100%.
do that, right? I think, and that's just it's a very interesting one. And we know we're up against that. We know we can't just we're not trying to just be average if we're trying to go in something that we're the trailblazers, and you got to be better than average if you want to make a move.
Well, yeah, Jerry, they remember that run? I'm sure someone's done a documentary about that, but that was
Oh, I
crazy.
did that documentary, man.
You did that
I
documentary?
did Insanity, yeah.
Oh wow. Oh,
Yeah, we
you
went.
wrote did that? How come I don't know that? Oh my
I
God.
don't know. Sundance 2013. That was a fun one. And we followed him. That was the thing. We followed him for like 4 years, 5 years when he was in college. So, you know, for me, I guess that was a kind of a hoop dream sort of story too.
Yeah, but he had that, like, it was that kind of like that 7 week, 8 week kind of
Yeah, yeah. But we were following him 4 or 5 years before that when he was
oh,
in.
and then you must have been
We
blown
followed
away
him
when
all the way to that moment. We didn't really have an ending, and then he gave us an ending.
You must have been blown away when that was happening, right?
Come on now. Weren't we all? Weren't we all?
Yeah, I was watching those games and like it was just kind of freaky, some freaky games too, right? Like I remember one game where they're on like 6 and he just like threw up like a Hail Maker 3 and they won the game. I was like, this is like there's a spiritual element coming on here, right? Like so
Super,
it was
super
nuts.
miraculous. Miracles, miracles every game. And
Yeah.
it was just a fun time and just the energy around it, right? And yet, you know, again, like there's racism that came up there too. And I think
Yeah,
that's
there was
okay.
that feed that if or I should say infamous ESPN article,
Chink
right?
in the
Where they
armor. Yeah,
yeah,
you know, these are just things that, you know, we just had all of this stuff is there. It's just a matter of like, okay, we gotta bring it up. So that's a place, and then we gotta shut it down. Like, oh, we don't do that anymore. We're gonna keep going, right? And so
all right. Well, you know what? I just found your film, Insanity. I'm going to watch it. I don't know how I missed it because I see I'm a big sports nut. I watch
oh
I
yeah.
watch almost
Yeah.
every sports documentary, but I
Yeah, no,
missed this one.
I like that film. I think I watched it a couple years ago. You know, I was like, it still holds. You know, sometimes old work doesn't hold. That
Yeah,
one still holds. So
I'm
hope
watching
you
it
enjoy.
tonight. I got it. I already
All right,
I got it queued up. So
great.
I'm a big like I said. I watch like try to watch all the this even though I do this. It's like I try
Cool.
to watch all the sports
No, I
documentaries.
love that. I love that. Yeah. No, I mean, if it moves you, write me an email.
All right.
Send
Well,
me a
yeah,
note.
100%. So maybe we'll definitely talk again when you make your next film or whatever. But we'll champion this film all we can. I think it's fantastic, and best of luck with it. I hope you get a good distribution deal. I know it's playing on these elements right now, but you're probably it's a Netflix documentary. I'm just saying it out loud. So
Well, thank you. Appreciate the time. Appreciate the praise.
all
Appreciate it.
right,
Thank you
man.
so much.
Have a good one.